how do I access the equity in my home? So I frequently get this question, hey Dave, I hear I have a ton of equity. How do I get a piece of it? I think I want to build a pool, or I think I want to pay off some bills, or I'm going through a separation and I need to give my partner half of the equity. So how do I access this equity? Full disclosure, I'm not a CPA or a financial advisor, so consult with a professional before making any decisions. Just use this information as a starting point to your equity curiosities. So before we get started, and to give a little bit of context to this presentation, keep these 3 questions in mind whenever you're looking or thinking about accessing some of your equity. How much equity do I need access to? So is it $5,000 or is it $100,000? How much will it cost me? There's going to be cost to borrowing money, even if it's your own equity. And it makes a difference if you only need $5,000 versus $100,000. You know, it's going to make a difference which method you're going to go with. And the last thing I would consider is, what is my capacity to pay it back? Because the money will have to be paid back in some way, shape, or form. So 1, sell the home. And I know what you're thinking. This is pretty obvious and it's also pretty dumb. Why would somebody want to sell their home just to get access to their money? And I'll give you an example in about 2 slides after this one. But the pros are, well, you get access to all of your equity, right? You sell the house, you pay back your loans and liens, and if you have equity, you keep it. There's no interest and there's no payments because there's no more loan. The cons, well, you no longer have a house. You give up ownership and possession of the home. So this takes us to refinancing. And most of you already know how refinance works. You basically go to one bank and you tell them to let you borrow money to pay back your existing loan with your existing bank. And in the process, there's the opportunity to borrow a little bit extra and keep it, and then you just pay it back, via your regular monthly payment. The pros are, well, you get access to most of your equity and you continue to own the home. The cons are, you're refinancing into current market rates. Refinancing involves fees, so your payment's going to increase, right? If you're refinancing into a higher rate and you're adding fees on top of that, plus you're taking out equity, your payment's going to increase. So let's jump over to the calculator and see an example of this, and I'll tell you why sometimes people opt to sell their homes. So a couple of months ago, I got a call from a gentleman, friend of a friend, says, hey, I have a question about refinancing. Now, I'm not a lender, but I don't mind answering questions and then referring to a lender. So his scenario, he has a house that he owes about $300,000 on. He's owned it for a few years. This doesn't apply because it's not a purchase. Oops. For 30 years, his rate was 5%. He never refinanced. The zip code doesn't matter. So his payment is about $1,874. The situation is, he's going through a separation. They have about $200,000 in equity that they want to split. So what he wants to do is refinance, cash out refinance, get $100,000 of equity, pay that back to the appropriate partner, and then just move on. So his new scenario would look like, okay, his current balance is $300,000. His new balance is $400,000, right? Because it's $100,000 above that. Now keep in mind there are fees. So I'm going to be conservative, and I'm going to say that a cash out refinance costs about $5,000, at least. His loan term, he's going to do it for 30 years. Now, this is a big one. Rates are up higher, and as of today, and check with your lender, they're in the 7s, low 7s, maybe high 6s, but a 7.22 isn't that far off. I'm going to leave it on there just to add some context to the scenario, but this 7.22 is really close. So his payment's going to go from $1,874 to $3,087. And remember the 3 questions that I said to keep in mind at the very beginning. How much equity does he need? Well, he needs $100,000. How much is it going to cost him? About $5,000, so it's not unreasonable. But what is his capacity to pay it back? He does not have the capacity to pay $1,200 more than he's paying now. And this is why somebody might opt to sell their house rather than refinance. Because first of all, he may not even qualify for this refinance. And second of all, if he qualifies, he's not going to be able to pay it back. So this gentleman is choosing to sell his house here real soon. Okay, so let's continue. This takes us to second loans. You can always do a second loan. And a second loan is exactly what it is. It's a second loan or an additional loan. So you take your existing loan and you don't touch it. You just apply for another loan in second position, just for the amount of equity that you need. So the pros are you can get access to most of your equity. You continue to own your house. Your current balance stays in first position at the existing rate, which if you have an interest rate that has a 2 in front of it or a 3 in front of it, this is huge. The cons are, well, obviously the second loan is going to involve some fees. The total payment is going to increase because now you have 2 loans instead of 1. And also another one is the new loan will likely be at a higher rate than even if you were to cash out refinance. So it's probably going to be a higher rate than a refinancing rate. But the benefit to this is if it's a small amount, you're better off keeping your existing rate and adding this to the back rather than refinancing the full amount. So let's go to the calculator to see how this would look. Right, so same gentleman, if we're using the same scenario, rather than taking this full amount here and adding to it and changing his rate, he would just leave this alone and get a second loan. So for his example, we said he needed $100,000. Right, let's just estimate that this is going to cost him $5,000 in fees. Could be more, could be less. 0 down. Let's leave the loan term for 30 years, although he could do something less than that if he wanted to, if he had the capacity to pay it back. Interest rate, we already mentioned it might be higher than this, but I'm not going to change it. I'm just going to leave it alone for the example. So this would bring him to, his new payment would be $1,874 plus $849, which is about $2,720 something dollars, right? About $2,700 and change, which is still better than $3,000. If he has a capacity to pay that, this would be a good avenue to take if he needed that $100,000. HELOC. HELOC stands for Home Equity Line of Credit. And this is actually my favorite way to tap into equity because of its flexibility. Now keep in mind, all of these methods require discipline. Misuse of any type of borrowing of money can get you into trouble really quick, so use with caution. So the simplest way I can describe a HELOC is imagine if a second loan and a credit card had a baby. All the other loans that I just mentioned are one-time use loans. So you take them out, you pay them back, and whether the terms were good or bad, you're done. You can't go back and reuse that same money with the same terms. The HELOC, like I said, it's like a credit card. So you can use the money, pay it back, and then use the money again, and then pay it back again. And you can do this over and over again, as long as the line of credit is open. And typically there aren't fees every time you use it. So the pros we already mentioned, you keep your existing loan. So if you have a low interest rate, you don't touch it. That stays in place. A HELOC is more like a second loan on your home. It's in addition to your existing loan. Now you do have to have equity to be able to have a home equity line of credit. Also, the fees are lower than refinancing. So a while back ago, I walked into one of our local credit unions just to get an idea of what this would look like. And just off the top of their head, they mentioned that the fees would be under $800, for sure under $1,000. So they said it was basically an application fee and some kind of appraisal or evaluation. And you only make payments on the balance that you owe. So if you apply for a HELOC and you don't even use the money, you don't make payments on it. And like I mentioned, you can borrow it and pay it back multiple times. So if you need to come up with money that you know you're going to pay back really fast for business or whatever your personal situation is, this is a good way to do it. Now the catch, because there's always a catch. The fees are lower, but there are fees. Also, and this is important, HELOCs typically have adjustable interest rates. It's not a fixed rate. So So this means that if we are in an environment like we have been for the past 12 to 18 months, you can expect your rate to be going up and your payment to be going up. So typically there is a cap on how much it can adjust per month and what the maximum cap is on your max rate, but it is adjustable. So read the fine print. Also, the payments are typically amortized as interest only, with a balloon payment at the very end. What this means is when you borrow the money, they calculate your payment on only the interest that's accruing, and the minimum payment does not pay down the balance. So if you take out the money and all you send is the minimum payment, by the end of the term, you're still going to owe the full balance. So this is really meant for someone that can pay it back in a short term. If you know for a fact that you will need the entire term to pay back the loan, then maybe a HELOC isn't for you. Maybe you should look into a second loan or some other method that we just discussed. So a great example of a good use of a HELOC that I can think of, and I know people that do this, is they'll use HELOCs to buy houses cash. So they don't have the actual cash, but they have access to a HELOC, which is as good as cash. And you don't have to be super rich to be able to do this. If you bought your home 5-8 years ago, I mean, chances are you probably have $150,000, $200,000, maybe $250,000 worth of equity. Is not unusual if you bought 8 years ago. So what some people do is let's say they'll establish a HELOC for $150,000. They'll find a fixer-upper, something that the bank typically won't touch, they won't finance, and they'll buy it cash with a HELOC. They'll fix it up in a couple of months, and then they'll either refinance it into a conventional mortgage, or they'll sell it, and they'll pay back the HELOC, and they'll make a profit. And then the HELOC is there to use again. So even with the HELOC having an adjustable interest rate, it's still better than taking out a hard money loan at 10 or 12%. And lastly, if you need money to get out of a bind, depending on your situation, you may not even need to touch your home's equity. If you have a 401k loan, a 401k plan, maybe look into a 401k loan. Sometimes you can borrow your own money from your 401k plan, and even if it involves interest on these loans, a lot of this time you're paying yourself interest. So you're borrowing money from yourself and paying yourself interest. I know a guy that took out a 401k loan to redo his kitchen. You know, that's smart. He's borrowing from himself and he's paying himself what most people otherwise pay to banks. And personal loans. If it's not a huge amount and you know you'll have the ability to pay it back in a short period of time, maybe consider a personal loan. Maybe you don't have to tap into your home's equity. You know, even if a personal loan rate seems high, you know, the lower fees and the shorter term might make it more attractive than touching your home's equity. That wraps up this video. If you watched till the very end, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video. As frequent as I have this conversation, I'm sure there's lots of folks out there that will appreciate this. If you have any questions that you can think of, don't hesitate to send me a message or put it in the comments and I will do my best to answer it.